This video is sponsored by Snot Goblin Gaming. I have a little trio of assassins in my collection, but there is one that I am missing, the Caluxus. In Warhammer 40k, the assassins cover the four major archetypes. There is the Vindicare, who's the ranger, the Eversor, who is the barbarian, the Calidus, who is the rogue, and of course the Caluxus, who is a anti-psyker soulless monstrosity who can kill you with a glance. You know, the four standard D&D archetypes. Yeah, the Caluxus is sort of the odd man out. Definitely the most 40k of the assassins. It wouldn't necessarily work in any other universe, but it really works in Warhammer 40k. And in 11th edition, it seems like Psyker is going to be a little bit more impactful on the game. So I might be needing one of these suckers. This is the final assassin I need for the collection. He has historically been a niche pick, but he's still got some interesting rules and abilities. Clipping him out, he is a tiny little human, one of the smallest figures Games Workshop makes, and he even has some face options. I don't know who would go with the no spooky grin face, but it's there if somebody wanted it. These microscopic minis are always a pain in the butt to clean, and I find the sanding twigs are basically required for removing mold lines. Any small scratch with a hobby knife will be visible on his tiny frame. And speaking of small, his head, his mask, his animus speculum is a hot mess of little tubes and details. I super carefully dragged my hobby knife over these seams, and then I took my plastic glue, wiped it off on the applicator so it was just a little damp, and I rubbed this into the seams to melt down any remaining ridge from the molding. I use this technique everywhere. Usually I wouldn't bother this hard with mold lines because it wouldn't be noticeable, but this guy is so small I had to make sure that he was truly flawless before painting. I glued his head all together, and then for the pose, he's looking slightly downward, but I want him looking up. This is gonna require a little editing as his big old noggin collides with the bits on his back. I had to grind this down a little bit so I could angle these batteries pointing down. Once I had that edit, I mixed up some green stuff and I smushed a small ball into his neck so I could get the angle I wanted. Where the other assassins have blades or guns, or blades and guns, this guy has just his head. He kills with a look, and sometimes a grenade or two. As the name would suggest, the Imperial Assassins are really good at killing, and 3 of them are pretty darn good at killing anything. But the Caluxus Assassin is very uniquely kinda only good at killing psychers. Now that's pretty specific, but he's pretty good at it. He has the grenades keyword, which means he can take advantage of the explosive stratagem, and then between his Speculum Animus, his spooky scary mask, and the life-draining touch, his melee weapon, you can kind of expect/hope for about 13 damage to a psychic model out of this guy. That'll kill most psychic opponents that are kind of on his level, and maybe take a nice chunk out of something a little bit bigger, like Magnus the Red. Reading his datasheet, my brain immediately fantasizes about sniping like Katarina Greyfox out of a squad of Custodians, or Ahriman out of some Rubik Marines, or in ideal circumstances, maybe a Neurotyrant out of a squad of Zoanthropes. That would be well worth it to get the points back out of this sucker, and he's kinda cheap at only 85 points. Now there is a reason for that cheap point cost, and that is you might just not run into any enemy psychers. Like if you're playing against Chaos Demons or Grey Knights, Eldar, or Thousand Suns, great choice, he'd have a lot of options. But you know, you might be fighting one of the other factions in 40k, like Tau or Necrons or Sisters of Battle, where there's just no enemy psychers to speak of. And all the rest of the factions, like Orcs, Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines, Imperial Guard, who do have access to a couple of psychic models, you just might not see him. He's pretty specific. But you know what? So am I. I'm a Black Templars player, and we hate above all psychers. And so the thought of this guy YOLOing into Magnus the Red is something I need to experience someday. And so I need one of these suckers in my army. I grabbed a Cobalt Keep 32mm base and sunk in a magnet. I based my assassins to look good alongside my Templar army, but I set them in the ruins of a city. This model came with a little tactical rock, but I can do better. I took some 1/4 inch cork, available from EonsOfBattle.com, and I tore off a large triangle. I ripped this up with my fingers, and then I cut out a smaller strip to add a chunk to the wall section to give it some more detail. I double checked that there was room for my assassin on top, and then I smothered the surface in 2 layers of Tamiya basic putty. This fills in and smooths the surface, and after a little sanding, it leaves behind a believable concrete texture. And the exposed cork on the sides represents the jagged, smashed edges. I glued this down to my base and then I ripped it in half. I want this to look like a very destroyed wall. I glued the 2 pieces back together uneven, and now I have my super tactical rock, and I need to incorporate it into the base. I mixed up some milliput and I smushed this all around where the cork meets the base, and I used this ball sculpting tool to push and prod it into shape so it looks like the earth is being pushed up against the protruding wall. I took some small pebbles and I pushed these into the wet putty, and then I took some wood glue and I lathered up the milliput and I sprinkled on some medium grit sand and then fine grain sand to get my sandy texture. Then to blend the sand with the rubble, I took some sandy texture paste and I pushed this into the corner of the reinforced concrete, and I glazed this where the sand met the base so it was seamless and natural. Now my ground is done and I want to do some more to the wall. I took a 0.8mm drill bit and I made some bullet holes drilling some little dents through the Tamiya putty layer. Then I took some Arma Painter scale barbed wire and I drilled some little holes into the side of the cork and I stuck these in as exposed rebar to help sell the look. This is a nice big chunk so I can really splash out on the metal. And speaking of exposed rubble and rebar, you can get even more from today's sponsor. We here at EonsOfBattle are always excited for a new set of terrain to sink our teeth into, and when Snot Goblin offered to send us a copy of their new terrain, we couldn't say no. We have their classic Gothic terrain set and love it, and now it's only getting bigger and better with the launch of 2 all-new terrain sets designed around 2 unique factions, the Orbital Drop Marines and the Gobloid Warhorde. These 2 sets are perfectly compatible with their classic terrain as well as each other, letting you build your terrain however you'd like. And if you're not looking forward to painting all the terrain, great news, Snot Goblin's offering these sets both unpainted and painted in over 20 different schemes. And when I say build it how you like, I mean however you'd like, with each comprising 20 pieces of perfectly modular, long-lasting ABS plastic terrain that lock together in an easy snap-fit system. No glue, no sprues, just building your terrain however you'd like, and get playing in an all-new game of 11th edition. And when you're done, disassembling it and storing it away is nice and compact. No more closets full of terrain needed, it all fits in the size of a shoebox. You don't want to miss out, so don't forget to sign up for the reminder emails for when the campaign goes live. And as a special bonus, pre-launch VIPs can get a free set of 11th edition compatible terrain templates and a free 44x60-inch mat. Follow the link below to follow the campaign today. Finally, my base is done and I can attach my fella. Since he has such small dainty feet, I decided to pin him, drilling some tiny holes into his ankles and then inserting some sewing straight pins. These are a little thinner in diameter than the 1mm brass rod I typically use for pinning models. I stuck him down into place and he's looking perfect. Now to start the paint job. I hit him with a black prime all over, making sure to hit every bit of the base. Then I took some white ink into my airbrush and I zenithalled him from above. He's so small, I don't plan to really take advantage of the zenithal. Every millimeter of him will get several brushstrokes, but getting to see the zenithal will give me some clues on where to put the highlights and shadows. For the undersuits of my assassins, I go with a more blue retro look, so I took some Statros blue and I mixed in black for the shadows and some white for highlights. And so that big old base isn't in my way, I pulled him off the base and I stuck him down to a paint handle. I started out glazing some of the darker blue-gray into the spots where the black primer was still peeking through. Then I put full-strength Statros blue over the bright white zenithal. This was pretty messy at first, but once I had something down, I could see it and edit it. I used some more black to really darken the shaded areas so I can push the contrast. I want him predominantly blue, but with some shadows of pure black and some highlights of pure white. I kept going, each brushstroke getting smaller and more precise. Then I mixed some of my white paint and started pushing the highlights even brighter, hitting his knees and picking out his toes. He doesn't actually have sculpted toes, but I figure if I make a little highlight bump, it'll look like his toes are peeking through in his body glove. I kept pushing the highlights, mixing in some more white paint and then applying it. Then I switched back to my previous layer and I glazed over top to smooth out the blends. Once I had him close to done, I switched to some Grim Black Speed Paint. This is a transparent color so I can more easily glaze it and blend it into the work I've already done. Then finally I was putting some dots of white on his most pronounced muscles as the brightest specular highlights to make his suit look nice and shiny. His clothing is all done and he is one step closer to the tabletop. Now on the tabletop, he's an acceptable damage dealer in the right scenario, but the other reason to take this guy is he has some really good abilities. Number one, he can do a 9-inch battle shock check at -1. It's just a blast that he emits at the start of any command phase. That could be really, really good for hitting a bunch of units at once. Maybe a little situational, maybe a little tricky to pull off. But the other thing he is he's just a little tiny guy with deep strike, lone operative, and stealth. A little bit of survivability tech, but also that deep strike is really important. If I pull a secondary mission card that makes me be somewhere or do an action somewhere on the battlefield, this guy would be an excellent choice. And for 85 points. Typically I've been using Space Marine suppressors as my action monkeys, and they're pretty bad as a unit and pretty wimpy. They get taken out a lot. But this little tiny guy, I could hide this sucker anywhere. I don't know, it might be worth a try. I feel like Games Workshop has really dialed in the points cost of these assassins. They've done a really good job where the math just about maths. It kind of works. You read the data sheets, you read their points cost, and it makes sense. Like I think this guy might be able to get me 85 points of value. And in the right moment, against the right opponent, he could super spike. I'm excited to give him a try. If anything, I'll take him just so that my opponent has to wonder what I'm up to. Now, my little assassin is ready for his retro red. I took some fiery vermilion, my favorite red paint, and I mixed in some black paint to darken it. I put this all over his straps. Now, bright red is not a very assassin-y color, but unlike some of the other assassins, this guy is meant to be seen. Him looking scary is part of his power. After the dark base coat, I took some brighter red and I started layering up highlights, especially on the top facing parts and along the edges. This guy is so small, this stuff came together really fast. Then to cheat in some more brighter highlights, I took Violent Vermilion, a pinkish orangey color, and I used this for the final edge highlights. Used sparingly, this can make the red look even redder. With the red now done, I took some desert yellow and I mixed in some black to start on some non-metallic metal gold for his buckles and sockets. These were incredibly small and fiddly, but holding my breath, I was able to get them all picked out. Then I highlighted with pure desert yellow. Then I barely dragged my brush to leave behind a little demonic yellow. Then just a dot of white paint here and there. Now he's nearly done, the only thing left is his head, and it's almost as big as the rest of him. For this challenge, I'm thinking true metallic metals. I grabbed some glistening gold and mithril blade 2 thin coats paints and I started base coating. I mixed a little black into the gold to make a shade color and I put this on the underside. Then for the top facing parts, they got 2 coats of full strength. Then I used Darkwood Speed paint to shade this, glazing it over, and it left me with some dramatic dark recesses. This also dulled the brilliance of the metallic paint, so I went over these areas again with glittering gold and then a mix of glittering gold and mithril blade for the highlights. That's the gold, now for everything else. I did the same thing with just the silver this time, making a darker version for the undersides, several coats so that I had full opacity, and then a wash of grim black for my recesses. I also used these colors on his grenades. All his weapons are getting this true metallic metal treatment. It's a really striking look that draws a lot of attention to his dome. Only a few things left, like his spooky face. It's almost perfect right now with the white zenithal still visible. I just used some gray paints to make the shadows more intense and some highlights of pure white. Then it was time for the weapons. For my assassin's techie bits, I used green, so I took Guardian Green and Electric Lime onto my palette. I base coated both of his eyes, his normalish one and the crazy one with Guardian Green, and then I did some highlights of a mix of the two, working in tiny little layers until it was pure Electric Lime. I also splashed this color onto his cheeks to make the eyes look glowing, and I edge highlighted the doors of his eye thingy. I think the Animus Speculum, his evil eye, remains shut until the moment he unleashes a full blast of his anti-psychic energy onto his victims. And you know what else I'm excited to release? All the awesome hobby products available from EonsOfBattle.com. Over there, we're all restocking our excellent hobby goodies: Gamer Grass Tufts, Grey Tide Studio Bits for your Space Marines, Army Painter paints, brushes, basing cork, ultra thin and ultra thick super glue, and we've got terrain. It's the best way to support us doing what we do by getting a membership. Each month, members get a credit good for any one terrain pack we've ever made or the brand new one. With his evil eye all finished, he's nearly done. He's got these little tubes running over his body, and I don't know what these are. I guess they channel his anti-magic energy from his body to his head. I base coated these in green and then highlighted them up to Electric Lime. They just add some nice techie greebling to this weird fella. I kinda alternate between true metallic metal and non-metallic metal. Non-metallic metal is great for giving you all sorts of control. It takes a lot longer, but you can get it to look exactly like how you want it to look. But true metallic metal is a lot quicker, and it's kind of a lot easier. I feel like this guy's weird head would have defeated me with non-metallic metal. It's got so many little test tubes and weird shapes. It would have been a real project to try to get some non-metallic metal going on this weird noggin. I also like his head being the only instance of true metallic metal on the model, and so it draws a lot of attention to his moneymaker, his weapon, which I think is his shooting weapon and his close combat weapon. Weirdly, he actually does more damage in close combat. He's got devastating wounds with the life-draining touch, which I assume is just getting a closer look with his eye because that eyeball unleashes the power of his anti-psychic abilities. I don't know, this guy's a weird one, but he's all painted. Now I just gotta do the base. My Templar bases are nice and simple. I put watered down Vallejo earth and I just dusted this on. Because of how tall the base is, I left the top of the wall with some white primer showing through. Then I used a little Darkwood Speed paint through the airbrush to make the edges of the ground a little darker and more saturated. Once that was done, I dry brushed the whole thing with some Pro Acryl Olive Flesh. This is a really desaturated tan that'll make the base look more dull, so my colorful model really pops on top of it. Then I took a little white paint and I hit the edges to make it more visible. I worked really hard on the base, so I want to see it. And speaking of seeing it, the exposed rebar needs some work. I took Blanchberry, mixed in a little bit of black, and I base coated all the metal sticking out. Then I coated these in some dirty down rust. This is the best rust effect, and after it dried, it made for some really good looking metal. Now he's done, the only thing left is to give him a name. Top supporters on our website get their names immortalized as members of my Black Templar Crusade. And Special Boyus is joining the ranks. The last piece of my assassin puzzle is now in place. I've got them all. I know there's some Horus Heresy ones, but I don't care about those guys. I've now got all of the 40k assassins, and I'm not sure which one's my favorite. They're all really good and really different from one another. Although painted up in the slightly retro scheme, I feel like they look really, really good as a unit. You would never take these guys as a unit, although there's one detachment in the game for Agents of the Imperium that does require you basically to take all 4 assassins and then buy them very expensive upgrades, enhancements. It's a really, really bad detachment. It's currently 3 detachment points. It would be a hard one to pick if it was 0 detachment points, but for 3, I can't imagine anyone would ever take it. I think for a regular Imperium army, any of the assassins would be a pretty good pick, the Calyxus being the cheap one right now, and I think he's pretty good. I'm looking forward to the spooky little anti-psyker killing some stuff on the tabletop, specifically Sean's Thousand Sons. Now, is it a bit rude to list Taylor so hard against Sean? I would say no, because Sean deserves it. I now am the proud owner of all 4 assassins. This has been several years in the making, but I've now got the complete set. Let me know in the comments below which guy is your favorite. I don't think I can pick one. I like them all a lot. If I had to say one though, I don't know, I do kind of like the big crazy head of the Calyxus assassin, and the wavy energy sword of the Calidus. And the Eversor has just the best head I've ever painted. And the Vindicare is also pretty cool. Thanks for watching.